Bienvenido, listeners. Today we will be discussing New Atheism, a force that has taken the internet by storm. Today, discussing this with me is my friend Mac. And I'm Ben.
Yeah, showing the world that we're on the cutting edge of 2006. We're going to be talking about New Atheism now.
Yes, of course. But, you know, as both of us are atheists.
As militant, angry, socialist atheists, the classic kind of atheists, the Cold War atheists, the enemies, those atheists.
Yes, but are we new atheists? That's the question.
I don't like New Atheism, so I'd say no. But New Atheism apparently doesn't care for such distinctions, and anyone who doesn't believe in God is sometimes considered a part of it.
Yeah, when they're throwing statistics around, yes. But I don't know. I'm sympathetic to the new atheist cause. To have secularism. I believe in it, and pro-science and all that. Like, I'm on their side for the most part. However, I do kind of they do wrestle my jimmies sometimes with the ranty and often condescending tone that they strike in interactions with religious people. I still think it's very important to respect other people and understand them and treat them as though you want to be treated, right? But on the other hand, I do think people should be allowed to draw cartoons about certain prophets, for example. So, I don't know, I'm kind of...
Joseph Smith.
Yes.
Yeah, right. I agree. Joseph Smith should definitely be allowed to be drawn. Among many other pointless things we could spend our days doodling. Anyway, but I guess that's sort of we're kind of jumping the gun here a bit. That whole craze of drawing certain things is a bit more modern than some other stuff. And I mean, atheism isn't exactly new. Like I said, atheists have been around forever, it seems. There definitely is a new trend, I guess, of like books and speakers and debates and all that crap. I don't really care for much of it, to be honest. I've read a couple of the books. I've tried to watch a few of the debates. I found them to be really dull and sometimes kind of just vindictive.
Yes, but here's the thing. I think that coming from the perspective of an atheist who grew up in a secular family in a very small religious community, I do think it's important for atheism to have a voice, because there's, the evangelical Christian movement is very, very vocal and has had a lot of political clout for a very long time, and atheists often feel like their rights recognition, their influence is trampled upon by how vocal religious groups can be. So I think that atheism does need to be out there. They do need to be writing books. They should be engaging the public with their ideas and expressing them just like everyone else. So I do think it has a place. And there's especially in America, you have a really broad sector of the public that aggressively disagrees with science. And I do think that somebody needs to step up and counter that.
Yeah, but fair enough. But there have been scientists who have done so. There have been periods even in American history where they've not only been progressive or secular, but they have been in many ways the most progressive and most secular. My concern in New Atheism is not just that they're writing books and doing debates and talking and blathering on and on and on, but more like, what does this actually represent? I mean, is this even progressive, ultimately? Like, is New Atheism just a reaction to religion, as you said? People who grew up in religious communities feeling isolated and irritated and sort of coming together on the basis of something that, to me, doesn't represent really in reality like a core for people to come together on. Atheism, as far as I'm concerned, is just sort of a natural consequence of a bunch of other things I believe and think about. It's not fundamental.
Well, yeah, the new atheist movement seems to have, like, atheism is their cause. That's the end goal, almost. And I would love to see a world where religion doesn't play a very big role, and that the roles that they play in today's world, the positive ones, are absorbed by other, institutions and what have you. I look forward to that. But I think that atheism as an end goal in and of itself isn't necessarily really a solution. If everyone stopped believing in God, it's not like that would solve homelessness or unemployment or structural problems in the economy or other contradictions in society that would still exist. It's atheism, socialism is something that can appeal to those causes where people's life circumstances and actual contradictions in society can be addressed. But godlessness in and of itself, well, I think it's good. I think that many new atheists are kind of kidding themselves that this is like the one goal that we should be fighting for.
So is it reactionary then? Because that is basically my position, is that new atheism is ultimately a reactionary movement because of that, because it doesn't address those things, and also because of the central, not in a negative sense, but the central way in which it reacts to religion, that it is ultimately limited by its, as far as I'm concerned, extremely narrow goals.
Well, I do think the origins of new atheism, like how you can, if there's such a thing as old atheism and a line that can be drawn somewhere, I do think that it has a large part to do with the very aggressive fundamentalist Christian movement that has been in play in the United States over the past, 30, 40 years or what have you. And I think that the secular segments of the population, react to that and have gotten increasingly fed up with and started to organize amongst themselves on the internet and rallying around people like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens. Some of those people, some of their ideas I really agree with, and others of them, for example, Christopher Hitchens and his opinions of women, for instance, I don't agree with. Sam Harris can be incredibly, profoundly racist, and Richard Dawkins...
I like that. Profoundly racist. Racist in a way that he never thought was possible before. Like, he broadens your mind on just what racism can really be.
And Dawkins, he can... I agree with like almost everything he says, but he doesn't really know how to pick his fights properly.
He's incredibly condescending, which isn't his worst feature, but he also has his ego seems to have convinced him that he is an expert on any subject he has an opinion on.
That I'm not going to disagree with that, but like for some of the things he does, I think are great. Like he like the books that he's written, some of them have, like, he's written children's books that are that make science really interesting and get kids into that. And he's The God Delusion is a really, I haven't actually read it myself, but
I read that one.
Yeah, it seems to make a decent case for just basic atheism.
It does. It's fine. It's a decent description of a bunch of reasons why religion is believed and why it's sort of harmful in many ways. Ultimately, though, my major problem with Dawkins' book, as with all of these guys, is just that it's, a bunch of attacks on religion, most of which I completely agree with, and then that's it. Religion's bad, and therefore, much like a disease, as Dawkins and others have sort of made the case for it, as if it were removed, the body, humanity, would be healthier, and that's it. And that's sort of the conclusion.
Yes, and I don't disagree with that, but I also don't think it goes far enough. It doesn't address social concerns, issues. I don't know, but the question of whether or not atheism is a progressive force, I think that's really hard to say, because I think that as economies develop, religious attitudes generally decrease. Atheism goes along with progress most of the time in terms of in an economic sense, right? Countries in Europe, especially Scandinavia, the most progressive, developed, healthy economies where people have subsistence and good lifestyles are generally more atheists. So atheism is kind of engaged with progress, and it happens.
That's fine.
And so the question then is, well, is atheism in and of itself progress? Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I think yes, in a sense. I think that some religious groups are very antagonistic towards science and get in the way of progress in terms of things like stem cell research and what have you. I know that's old news. That's just an example, but I think that an atheist society generally is more progressive, and it is a good thing to it is a good cause. But I just don't think whether or not new atheism is a reactionary force to Christianity, does that then mean it's not a progressive?
I think so. I think it really does. And new atheism is let's face it, primarily centered around the United States, primarily because that country is much more religious.
Yeah.
That's the reason. It's a reaction, I think, from a lot of people who would consider themselves sort of enlightened academic, or at least pseudo-academic individuals who want to be like the rest of the world, don't want to be a bunch of ignorant, backwards idiots. And while that's, a laudable goal, I think that there's this tendency to try to use atheism as a goal as kind of just an excuse not to worry about everything else, ultimately.
Yeah, you could make a case.
Like, if you're an atheist, then that's good enough. You're smart, you're clever, you're witty, you're good-looking, you're done. You're an atheist, that's it. You're perfect. And that's both what a major theme I've gotten from New Atheism, and certainly what I've gotten from the new atheists who are on the internet.
Well, when you put it that way, it sounds incredibly petty bourgeois, like individualistic,
Well, it is.
I'm doing my part in the world.
It's all about personal belief. I mean, this is what New Atheism boils religion down to, your personal belief.
But no, New Atheism isn't just that. It's also that they recognize that the more importance that society as a whole puts in science, science funding for NASA, etc., and the more we value science and rational thought, the better off that society is. It's not purely individualistic.
Well, then they can just be futurists. They don't need to care about religion at all. Religion will either go wherever it will or not, and it doesn't matter. But we're talking about New Atheism here, not just people who want more funding for NASA. And the goal of New Atheism, to the extent that it even wishes to put itself in a position where it has clear goals, is to see an end to religious thinking. And that's it. That's and as far, and if you want to say, you don't need every organization on earth taking on capitalism or taking on every single goddamn thing, fair enough. But if we're looking at New Atheism, it has, in and of itself, it's definitely, as far as I'm concerned, it is definitely a reactionary movement.
What about the New Atheists' involvement in, for example, the pro-LGBT movement in the United States? When the Supreme Court, for example, was looking at the gay marriage rights in the United States, and New Atheists were some of their biggest supporters. Maybe not their most numerous, or whatever, but they were very vocal and they were very supportive of that. They are involved in progressive social movements.
I would argue that on the basis of how easy it is for New Atheists to become just as racist and bigoted as any religious person, that their support of that had less to do with any clear, coherent philosophy underpinning New Atheism, and more the fact that religious people were on one side, so we need to be on the other side.
Well, yes, and on the other hand as well, as you mentioned, New Atheists do find themselves coupled with right-wing movements as well, like, for example, anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, reactionary movements. And in fact, Sam Harris, Slavoj Žižek was quoted as saying, "Why do I support the death penalty? Because Sam Harris is still alive." And Sam Harris takes the fact that he doesn't like Islam because it's religion, right? But basically anti-Arab in
aggressively
a sense.
anti-Muslim.
Yeah, and he's very racist, and a lot of young atheist people, there's like a whole generation of young people that are following this New Atheist movement and consider themselves progressive, but then in some ways can be extremely right-wing and have very right-wing conservative views, and because of the focus on Islam and its association with right-wing groups.
Well, sure, there's nothing... I mean, this is a feature more of the United States than anywhere else as well. There's nothing about religion that obliges it to be right-wing. It's generally conservative because it wants to maintain established systems, and to the extent that those established systems sort of take it for granted that religion exists, then religions generally will want to be, maintaining things. But particularly in a period like today, where religions are in some ways under attack, not so much in the States, but in Europe and other places where people just don't care so much, we're probably going to see religions become more and more radical, not in radical fundamentalist sense even, but more in a radical sense of trying new things and trying to reintegrate into society again on a much more personal level, trying to find those connections with the millions of people who left in ways that they can't get anymore from government support. Mm-hmm. And, when looking at new atheists who will talk about certain projects or ideas or principles that religions currently don't support, I think that they have really put themselves into a rather awkward situation where they're going to end up supporting things that religions could just as easily support in the future. Like, religions could wholesale end up supporting the, LGBT issues, and I think that they eventually will. That's what they did with every other major social crisis and progressive issue in history. They're all against slavery now. There were religions in the States that were explicitly in favor of that. They split over that issue. They're the same thing over desegregation and equal rights and women voting and that kind of stuff. Each and every one of those things, religions dragged their heels on, and then they just adopted at some point wholesale. And so for new atheism, which is still, while we're talking about it well after it started, it is still relatively new. It could, I think, become completely swept away by simply a change in tactics by major religious institutions.
Yeah, but that is completely dependent on world events.
Well, so what? Well, all it would really take is for religion to just back off of the stuff they're losing on, and all these new atheist people would just be pushing against an open door, and they would just I
don't think religions will do that, though. For starters, churches are totally there's a whole universe of them, of different churches. There is the one Catholic Church, but on the Protestant side, it's just not even a network. It's just a hodgepodge.
Yeah, but there are trends and there are movements and there are
yes, but as you said, religion is usually historically conservative.
Yes, but
almost all of the time. And there are progressive churches and that are involved in social causes and ones that do help people and are involved in charity and blah blah blah. But most of the time, religion is conservative. It is usually right wing. It is usually against change. It's against progressivism in general.
And I'm not saying they'll adopt change. What I'm saying is that as society changes, these religions will inevitably either wither away or they'll have to catch up.
Adapt or die. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's
and when they adapt, and as they adapt, new atheism will find itself, I think what will probably happen is new atheists will become more aggressively anti whatever it is those religions are adapting to. That's my prediction for where new atheism is going to go, is that as religions adapt to the sort of modern world of equality and rights for homosexuals and etc., that kind of stuff will put new atheists in the position of saying, well, they must be wrong because it's religion, and therefore I'm going to be anti all those things now.
I see what you're saying, but I don't think so. I mean, I do think in general the people who are atheists are usually more progressive, with the exception of the right-wing ideas that some of them hold.
And I'm saying that progressive aspect of new atheism is basically a fiction, that it is based on a reaction to religion, that so long as religion is conservative, the new atheism will position itself as progressive. But that's it. And if that changes, new atheism will change as well.
Like, they would rather just disagree with the religious people than actually adhere to a
principled
ideology.
Agreement. Yeah. Like, come together on the basis of some broader goal. Because that's what I said. I don't think new atheism has that within it, as a philosophy, as a set of ideas, as an organizational thing.
Yeah, well, you could be right. I mean, I do think the new atheist movement is kind of a confused mixture of people, all of whom are annoyed with and distrust and dislike religion. And that's kind of the only one quality that they all hold. But the general trend is that, as I mentioned before, as economies develop, religion doesn't play as big of a role, and atheism is just kind of the norm. It's not like necessarily even a movement of people. It's just the fact that people are leaving religious institutions because they don't really connect with them anymore. So there is a general global trend towards atheism, and every time a new poll is released, the people, atheists on Reddit salivate at its.
Oh yeah, they love talking about it.
There's a 0.5 decrease in the number of people that claim Christian in the United States.
The thing is, in the case of North America, we live in one of the least religious parts of North America.
We live in the least religious.
Campbell
part.
River apparently is the most unreligious. They actually have like 55% or whatever.
How many people live in Campbell River?
Well, thousands. It doesn't matter.
Thousands?
Well, it doesn't matter how many people live in Campbell River.
Okay,
This is a percentage thing. It doesn't...
Okay, but to put it in perspective, BC is the most atheist province in Canada, and Vancouver Island is probably the most atheist part of BC in general.
Other than Vancouver and Campbell River and a few other places.
Yeah.
But in any event, religion doesn't matter so much here. So it is a bit of an odd thing when we talk about how, general trends leading people towards, secularism. The government here is mostly secular anyway. And to be perfectly honest, I don't like the government here. So secularism to me doesn't really ring true as like this golden opportunity.
What, do you mean provincial or municipal?
Any of them. This is the problem I think a lot of the atheists in the States don't entirely appreciate, is that it is entirely possible to not have what you want and also not have religion. That, like, these things don't go hand in hand. That there's a very real way in which, government can be regressive and be atheistic, or even just secular, or just whatever. They can have any number of religions or none or anything.
Well, if you put it that way, it makes me wonder why the new atheists don't bring up the Soviet Union as one of the greatest nation states to have ever existed.
Well, probably because they're not socialists. I mean, that's a rather simple point. As far as what I understand about new atheism, it doesn't really care so much about the political side of things, except insofar as, individual candidates not thanking God before they do anything.
Or issues that the church takes up. Like, for example, the case that the Supreme Court just decided not to do anything about Hobby Lobby and whether or not contraceptives need to be included in birth control.
Yeah. Well, that was fairly recent. But even more recent was the Oklahoma making abortion a felony. There was also the LGBT rights bill that got shut down in the House of Representatives in the States.
Right.
I mean, those are both American examples, but we are talking about a basically American movement here. Those things happen, and yeah, new atheists will be like, those fucking bastards. They're a bunch of, backwards Neanderthals, etc., etc. And that's often true. I mean, it is Oklahoma, after all, and that place is known for basically nothing. I mean, what do you know Oklahoma for?
The city bombing?
Yeah, and the play, right?
What play?
Oh my god. Well, then never mind, right? The play isn't even that great. Anyway, yes, it is a bit of a problem, and yeah, they do care about politics in that way. There is an appeal to politics, but as far as I'm concerned, that's like the most facile way in which politics can be addressed, on the basis of, does this person believe in God or not? Or what is this particular issue that we're going to vote for or vote against? There's no real robust idea that's being put forward here with regards to politics. It's just a series of issues, it's a series of bullet points, and it's just as, talking point and bullet point focused as the conservatives or Republicans or Democrats or anyone else is. It's just a list of things they want, and it's almost like new atheism is begging to be made into just another, lobbyists' demographic.
Well, I was just thinking that, like, if you think of them as any other focus group or any other lobbying group, all of their concerns kind of make sense. Like, for instance, taking on police cars that have "In God We Trust" in the back of them for all the counties, or the fact that in many places in the United States you legally can't hold office if you don't believe in our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And, these are things that are wrong and that don't respect minority opinions and aren't inclusive to everybody and do need to be changed. And if not the new atheists, then who else is going to try to address those concerns? And if you look at it that way, well, sure, it kind of makes sense. But that doesn't actually build up to a movement that is striving towards something better. It's just kind of another movement taking things issue by issue and whatever concerns them anything else that doesn't concern their cause is kind of ignored. What I can say, though, is that new atheists who do want to be involved with a movement that does actually have an end goal and something greater to aspire to should look to socialism as something to participate in.
Well, or politics in general.
Politics in general, yeah, because, these are the ways that we can actually improve economic development and improve jobs and people's lives, and when that happens, the shift is generally towards atheism. And so new atheists, if they really, in the long term, want to spread their message, should get involved in social movements that will actually make the world a better place.
Get involved. Write to your congressman. Yeah, all that stuff. Sure. I agree. People should get involved. That is like the one, I feel like I should end every sentence with that phrase. Do shit, Get involved. Do more. Yeah, all that's good. I mean, getting involved is great, but we can talk about how economic development generally results in a more secular society, and that is generally true. But in addition to that, we are talking about, in 2016, right now, we are talking about kind of a circumstance that hasn't been seen before. We're talking about a world in which religion is still stagnating, even though the economy is also stagnating. That even with ups and downs in the economy, even with wars that we've had over the last, say, 15 so years, atheism is still just sort of trundling along, and religion is being left with a very, truncated role to play in society. The trend it's not just against religion, it's against a lot of things, a lot of well-established social institutions, and religion just seems to be one of the biggest victims of this trend, that people don't see a value in it. When you've got your money to spend, why would I want to go to church and give them money? Why? I can just go online and find an actual charity to give my money to if I want to help people. Why do I go to church? For the social purposes? But I don't know anybody who goes to church. Why would I do that? This is, I think, the underlying problem that religion faces and the underlying benefit that new atheism has really been able to grow into a relevant movement from. And with that, religion isn't simply becoming smaller, it's also becoming a lot more polarized. Ultimately, the people who will be hurt most by this are the liberal Christians, the moderate so-and-sos, those people who are the most disinterested in their religion but have it as just sort of something they do all the time. And those people will go, well, as the children of those people, they're like, well, why would I go to church? My parents didn't really care, it doesn't really matter, most of my friends don't, so I'll just live my life like a normal person would and just not go to church.
Like a normal person would.
Well, that's sort of the thing. There comes a point where religion becomes more and more something you have to be exceptional about. You have to specifically decide to go out and do. And so that the people who are going to church, the people who are involved in their religions, will become those people who specifically want to be involved.
On the other hand, what about all the vast swaths of people in the United States and even here in Canada who have lost their jobs, who have been laid off because of the economic crisis, and religion often can fill that void of where
But can it though? Can it anymore? Because religion does need to actually, they need to keep the lights on in the chapel as anywhere else. You go to church, you're not going to church just when you're in a bad situation. You might say, I just lost my job and I need that support network. But I think that's something you're going to be going to that church to just leech off of them. And that's not what they want. Ultimately, at the end of the day, they want the kind of sustainable social core that religion, at least in Canada and in a lot of other countries, and I'd say even in the States more and more, is losing. It's losing that sense that this is the center of the community, that this is what everyone does. And in that case, religion does, I think what religion is and what new atheism is fighting against fundamentally changes. New atheism seems to be fighting less and less against religion as just this abstract thing people do, like a bad habit people have. And it seems now that it's fighting against an addiction, a thing that the people who are involved in it now are doing it for self-destructive reasons. That religion isn't just something you can do on the weekends. That it's going to destroy your life and the life of everyone you know.
Well, on the other hand, the religious habits and behaviors of many churches have been very culty, where they have, Christian soccer teams, Christian reading groups, Christian get-togethers, Christian this, and it is kind of an all-encompassing thing in some communities.
Well, you got to do that. How the hell
So-
else are you going to get anyone to go to church unless you get them to go to church all the time? And this is what I'm saying, is like that there is a radicalization, or I don't know what radical doesn't really make much sense in this case. I guess like an intensification, like a professionalization of religion. That religion is no longer for amateurs.
The faint of heart.
Yeah.
If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. Like, you got to really want to be here. And I think that seems to be the trend, like that there is this attitude, like if you show up to a church, you're not that there really isn't going to be such a thing as lay people in the future. That you got to be like actively involved. And this is sort of what I'm wondering from New Atheism, is that not so long ago it seemed that wasn't the case. That what they were fighting against was just what New Atheism seemed to be fighting against in its earliest incarnation was the irrationality of believing in God. And we haven't talked about God at all. We've been talking about these institutions that are very real, that in many cases are very powerful. And yet there seems to be this, at least in the case of New Atheism, there seems to be this almost hypocrisy to it. That on the surface, what they're fighting against is irrational beliefs. But in reality, they are fighting against and attacking, that they're fighting against real physical brick and mortar institutions at the end of the day, and not the ideas. I mean, and I don't really have a problem with either of those causes, but what worries me about New Atheism, again, is this disinterest in clarifying what it is they're actually doing, because they'll rhetorically talk about, teapots and God and other stupid bullshit people believe in. And then it'll come down to, well, what are we fighting for? Well, we're fighting to, divest government of support of religion. Well, that's real. That's an actual thing. That's a movement. That's a worldview. And as many atheists will say, atheism isn't a worldview. And yet that's...
Yeah, but isn't what you just said in support of that? If they are actually fighting against real institutions...
Then that's great.
Doesn't that mean their cause has some sort of value and real place in the world?
Well, maybe, but what is worrying to me is how, as religion is changing and as it becomes more radical, what exactly is it that New Atheism or atheists or secularists or whatever the hell you want to call yourself, what will they be fighting against in the future? Because right now, they're not defeating religion. They're hedging it into a more and more extreme sort of world. And that's not a bad thing, because at the end of the day, we need to be kind of intellectually honest with ourselves. We can't just let religion have the playing field because we're worried about how dangerous it could be if we put it into a corner. But at the same time, if you don't have the intellectual and theoretical wherewithal to really put an end to it, it will just push it to an extreme level and then let it explode.
I do think that the way that some religious institutions have been behaving is kind of like they're in their death throes. Like, they don't understand how to interact with this new world full of millennials, aka snake people that don't...
Snake people? I've never heard that one before.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'm not... am I a millennial? I don't even know. I don't.
Yes, we are.
Oh, okay. I thought I was too old for that. But in any event... Well, I am an atheist, and I love the internet and all that other crap, so I guess I'd be a millennial just by default anyway. Ultimately, though, yeah, a lot of my concerns in New Atheism are hypothetical. Like, there are a lot of things that I see in it as a movement that concern me. And so I can happily say much of it is not yet seen. Like, much of it is unfulfilled. It's a lot of fear, a lot of concern that I have about it. But it is not, as far as I'm concerned, it's not unfounded, and it's not just fear. At the same time, I'm not willing to just sort of let it go. I'm not just going to say, well, New Atheism is attacking religion, and I hate religion, so, good luck to you. I want the best arguments, I want the best reasons, and I want the best bedrock to these ideas. And I really don't think that what New Atheism has sort of thrown up there as its arguments are really that great. There's a lot of kind of like this just modern liberal thinking that is very individualistic and very obtuse about what it is it's trying to do.
Well, I do think that if you acknowledge that the economic crisis is affecting the more fervent religious behavior, the crisis of capitalism is showing itself in not just in politics, but in media and in people's religious beliefs and the behavior of religious institutions. And if you acknowledge the crisis of capitalism as being the core problem, then all of a sudden, if you're a new atheist, then you should, in acknowledging that, should shift your focus where, capitalism is the problem, where capitalism is the system that's preventing underdeveloped economies from gaining foothold and from developing into what they can, where they can themselves be in a position to shed their old religious conservative beliefs and go into something new. Capitalism is the system that's preventing economies from developing. It's preventing the United States economy from developing, and the problems that capitalism has created is one of the major problems and the causes of this uptick in religious fervor and incredibly militant conservative behavior. And so really the new atheists should view that as their main enemy and not religion itself, and instead look to the root cause of what's driving this behavior to begin with.
Yeah, I'll admit, I have been treating new atheism as an actual force that has been pushing religion in a particular direction. You're yes, that was wrong with me to do so. New atheism is not nearly that powerful or significant. It is, I guess it is more symptomatic than anything else. But I can say that, and yes, it's true. The general trend, and we're kind of just treating this as a fact, that as economies develop, religion goes down. But that's not always the case.
With the one sole exception.
No, I'm not
America.
just talking about the United States of center of the world. I'm not just talking about them. I'm talking about the last, say, 400 or 500 years. There are periods of extreme secularism, of extreme atheism, or extreme religious fervor. And as the economies of the world have developed, those movements have gone up and down based on things that aren't simply tied to the economy. There was a major uptick in religious fervor in the United States and in other countries as well during the Cold War. The countries that were fighting in the Cold War, in fact, had a huge, fighting against the Soviet Union in the Cold War, had a huge impetus for religious fervor, and that religion sort of filled in that need. I think there is really something that needs to be said for just war and conflict as well, that the economy can be well developed, or at least developing. And it's not just a simple matter of saying, here's the GDP, here's what the average person makes in a year, therefore this is the percentage of people who will believe in God.
Right.
That's just idiotic, and I think we both agree on that, I'm sure. But
yes.
It's just one of those things where, I understand America's an exception, as they are an exception at everything. But also, there are other exceptions that apply to the rest of the world as well, even to us in Canada, where we have the most religious parts of our country are often the places that are doing the most well economically.
Yeah, it's a lot more nuanced than just economic development versus people who believe in God. It's a lot more nuanced.
There's also a matter of economic equality. There's also a matter of education. Education doesn't always go with economics. That an economy can be developing and still be incredibly poor. Like, people can be poor in the country, but the economy can be doing very well. Ultimately, this comes down to the strength of the working class and how willing people are to fight for concessions from capitalism. And I think it's ultimately those concessions that give people not so much. It's like the sense of security, the sense that at the end of the day, religion is sort of an answer to a question. And if people aren't asking those questions, if people aren't actively concerned about where they'll go when they die, then they won't care so much about what those answers are.
Yeah, not just where they'll go when they die, but am I going to get this job? Am I going to be able to get off welfare?
Is there something that will make this awful situation fair?
Better, yeah.
Or just fair, like something that will rectify my life, or cosmically solve what is an obvious injustice to me.
Yeah, and if for the most part people are doing fine, they can pay their electricity bills and their kids are going to college and everything's cool, then there's not really so much a need to that. But another aspect to this is whether or not a country is at war, because when they're at war, there's usually a big uptick in religious, behavior and beliefs, because people's kids are going off to fight. And America is a country that's been at war forever. So that might, start to shed some light on why there's the church plays such a
like
big
I
role
said,
in their life.
like the Cold War. I mean, the Civil War was really where things changed for them. But major devastating conflicts tend to make countries more religious. That's all, well established as far as sociology goes.
And, given the instability in the world and probably the increasing instability that we'll see due to things like climate change and economic crisis and austerity and all that, it's even possible that you could see an upsurge in a whole new religion. That it could, this trend towards atheism could completely backfire and there could be some new movement or some new resurgence in some existing movement that tries to address the problems that capitalism is creating. All sorts of shit can happen.
Plenty of religions could crop up. Religions are popping up all the damn time, right? They usually just disappear within a few years. New religion, the whole new religion movement, spiritualism and all that sort of stuff, could, say, in 300 years become the dominant way in which religion is understood. And the problem, I guess, I have with new atheism is that it doesn't clearly identify how it is different from those sorts of things. It doesn't identify, not in the sense that it believes in God or believes in spiritualism, from a progressive standpoint, from the standpoint of equality. It doesn't seem like within new atheism in itself there is anything that is necessarily less misogynistic or less racist than what religion could be capable of.
Right, because they are on the side of LGBT people and women because of the causes that religion is against.
Yeah, and particularly in the case of racism, where we already have, as you mentioned, good examples of how a person can be, a new atheist and still be racist. There is no incompatibility there. And that's oftentimes a major criticism of religion, that it, divides people, that it treats people as like fundamentally different just on the basis of some arbitrary thing that they were essentially born with.
Yeah, and you could say that about a lot of religious people, where they were kind of born with the traditions.
Yeah,
and,
born into a religion that they now believe, and it's no shocker that religions follow demographic lines. If you're born in a particular country, you're just more likely to believe, blah, 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 blah. And in the context of New Atheism, a movement that is at least ostensibly trying to fight that kind of unconscious acceptance of the circumstances you just sort of found yourself with, it really does concern me how easy it has been for people who call themselves atheists, new atheists or whatever, to be as racist as they come.
People in the new atheist movement generally consider themselves progressive, I would think. But, yeah, I mean, they can be associated with, because they're anti-religion, they're anti-Islam, anti-Muslim, and then can be anti-Arab and can be racist because of it. And because it doesn't have a foundation, a real doctrine other than I don't believe in God, it can be led in different directions, and it can be just kind of a hodgepodge of people that don't believe in God. But on the other hand, I do think there is some value in that, where secular people in very religious communities need a community themselves. The new atheist movement, I think, does serve a purpose in terms of uniting different people who feel alienated by very religious practices in their community, and it is very difficult to be a secular family in a religious community. It does have a place, but in and of itself isn't necessarily a world-changing social movement like it thinks itself as. I get that. I don't have any problem.
I don't have any problem with new atheism as a halfway house for religious people, but I don't want anyone spending any more time there than they need to.
Yeah, okay.
Is essentially what I think. Like, yeah, if this is a way in which a person who was extremely religious, or even just unconsciously religious, finds their way out and finds the bigger world that they can now be a part of again, that's great. But God, get out of new atheism as soon as you can. Which is also my argument for religion. Ultimately, get out of religion as soon as you can. As soon as you realize that the world is bigger than this, that there's more to do than your religion, and as soon as you realize there's more to do than fighting against religion, move on.
I like that, a halfway house. And, to be fair, I just want to say this as an atheist, that there are a lot of religious institutions and people that do really good work in their communities and do help people that are in need. I do think that
Why, I even have friends who are religious.
Well, and capitalism does use religion and charity as kind of a way to save face, to legitimize itself, and I do think that can be misused. But from the perspective of just people that whose hearts are in the right place and want to do good in their community, religion is often the way that they do that, and I don't have any issue with that. That's good.
Religious people who want to help their community and try to help it through their religion, that's a good person right there. You can talk all about how the religion is, cutting off money from the top, or is an incredibly inefficient charity.
Anti-shellfish, anti-polyester.
Yeah, but there's all kinds of stupid things you can criticize religion for, and New Atheism appears to be really happy with that level of criticism. But the real criticism, I think, of religion isn't that they believe in God, but that it provides people with an illusion that obstructs their ability to actually solve the problems in society. That's the real issue. And to continue to talk about the shellfish and the polyester flannel clothes or whatever nonsense you can find out of the Bible. Oh, there's a rule in the Bible and it says this insane thing no one would possibly do anymore. Well, yeah, that's why people don't do it anymore. I don't understand why new atheists treat religious people as if they're computers. Like that they're just going to take this book and just consume it and then just follow it through like a kind of program.
Yeah.
Religious people are just as massive hypocrites as anyone else is. They take what they find appealing and they apply it, and they basically just find ways to ignore the rest. And that's it. An unwillingness to recognize that fact is just another major flaw in New Atheism and in a lot of the criticism of religion. Like I said, I think that the real issue isn't that the stupid, myopic problems, I put that in massive quotes, that people have with religion, but that it's that it is an obstruction to real solutions ultimately.
And I suppose you're implying here that New Atheism is in and of itself tricking.
Also an obstruction.
Obstruction to real.
Yes,
solutions.
That is exactly my point. That it is presenting us with a problem that we can solve in much the same way as religion presents us with a problem we can solve. But at the end of the day, it doesn't mean very much for people's lives. It doesn't put us in control of our own lives and our own society any more than abandoning religion does.
On another note, one thing that I think is interesting is that because a lot of conservative sectors of society and the media have had this backlash against Muslims and Islam in general, that they're terrorists, that they're a threat, that the refugees are a threat, blah, 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 blah. And socialism has come to defend Islam, anti-Islamophobe.
The main thing for atheism versus socialism, or atheism and socialism, is that socialism historically has always been atheist. I mean, within the modern period, I guess. But what it does that New Atheism and sort of atheist-centric movements don't do is that it tries to look at the world from an actually materialist standpoint. It doesn't just say that your idealism, your spiritualism, your supernaturalism is wrong. It says that what we need is a materialist, naturalist solution to these problems. That there are problems that are facing society, and they're problems that are not a result of ideas. They're a problem that is a result of real material circumstances. And my personal problem with New Atheism is that it doesn't get beyond the idealism of religion.
That it becomes an idealism in and of itself.
Yeah, it is treating this as a conflict of ideas. It's treating this as a worldview problem. If people stop believing X, then they'll start doing Y, that kind of thing. And the argument from the point of view of socialism, scientific socialism, is that what is needed to get people to it's the other way around. It's, you need to change circumstances in order to change ideas. And we've seen that, at least circumstantially, here and there, from the point that, as people's lives improve, material improvements result in changes to ideas, not the other way around.
There are a lot of social movements, progressive groups that are defending minority Muslim communities from persecution, and anti-Islamophobic kind of tendencies within progressive groups. And while I don't like Islam in so much as I don't like Christianity or any other religion, there's nothing specific about Islam, or any other religion, as an atheist, I am still happy for them to stand up for their rights, because they are a group of people that are being persecuted by the right-wing media groups and conservatives
and others,
and
even by new atheists as well. I mean, this is the problem.
Absolutely.
That we're talking about here. We're talking about new atheists who will suddenly find themselves in total agreement with the arch enemies on these particular issues. When it comes to the more foreign religion, suddenly it's, they're the worst problem. And, if you want to play the game of what's the worst religion in the world today, we can do that. But that's not at all a serious discussion on what we actually need to do.
That's a sideshow.
Yeah, we can. I can do that. And if you want to be like, we can go through the books and find the worst quotes.
But
we can do whatever we want.
The whole point. The reason why I think not only conservatives but also new atheists often target Islam is because the whole thing of suicide bombers and violence in the Middle East and all of that. But the fact of the matter is that if Christianity, because of the Middle East is one of the most economically underdeveloped places in the whole world.
That's the whole point.
And if Christianity had been the major religion in the Middle East and Islam had been the major religion in the West, then we would be faced with the absolute reverse problem that we have today, where we would have Christian terrorists and suicide bombers. It has nothing to do with any inherent traits in any particular religion, and everything to do with economic development and relations and class relations and imperialism and problems on a global scale.
A lot of other stuff that new atheism and a lot of atheistic movements today don't even care about. At the end of the day, it comes right back down to the basics of a materialist philosophy that addresses the economic and political reality that we're facing. And as far as I'm concerned, my dislike of new atheism boils down to that. An unwillingness to face that reality, just as unwilling as many religions at the end of the day. New atheism is just as idealistic in its approach to society as religion is. It treats this as a intellectual pursuit and not an economic and materialist one. That the problems the world faces are economic, materialist, and we need to be addressing it in that way, and that the only way to change people's minds is not through debates or books, although that, keep putting those out because those do help, those buttress the whole position. But at the end, that ultimately this is about the economic circumstances that we face. And if those economic circumstances change in a way that is advantageous to religion, and they entirely could, religion will just become triumphant again. But what we, as you and me, as atheists, as socialists, and I hope as atheists generally need to be doing, is making the case for economic systems that do away with religion, not through arguments, but through the cold, hard reality of just lives that don't need it anymore.
Amen.